In today's video, I am going to show you how to replace the diesel fuel filter on your Ford Ranger, Mazda BT50 or Ford Everest. Using your pick or the small screwdriver, you will just need to open up the locking part that secures these lines to the filter assembly. There are two different types of clips here. They're fairly self-intuitive once you have a look at how they're positioned together. There should be no force when pulling these hoses off the assembly. If you're having to force it, then you obviously haven't released the clip correctly. It may be important too to just take note of the position of these hoses, and you may want to mark them or just take a photo with your phone, and that way you can return them to the correct position. Once the four hoses have been removed, it's now time to disconnect the electrical connector that is underneath the filter assembly. You can't see this in the video, but you can reach around and feel it. I couldn't undo the electrical connector on this one with the filter still in place, so it was time to remove the filter. The filter can be removed just by grabbing it and lifting it straight up. You can see here that the connector is still attached, and I was able to disconnect it quite easily once the filter assembly had been removed from its housing. Now you'll be able to have the first glimpse of the filter assembly as a complete unit. At this point, it's important to note the position of the arrows so that it can be reassembled in the same way. To open the filter assembly, you just need to wind that plastic collar in the direction of the arrow just to separate the upper and the lower parts of the fuel filter assembly. Be aware there will be some fuel inside the bottom bowl when you do this. Once you've discarded any of the diesel that was in the lower fuel filter assembly, it's time to give it a good clean out just to make sure that there's no debris or anything sitting in the bottom of that container. I just used some brake and parts cleaner here just to give it a good spray and just to rinse it all out. I'll also make sure that it's all fully dry before I put it back together. Looking now at the top half of the assembly, we can pull the filter out of the top half. And this is the first time you can actually begin to examine the filter, and you can see that there's a certain amount of debris in the top half of that filter that has been caught, so the filter has certainly been doing its job in just filtering those contaminants out. Also, we want to make sure that the top half of that filter is just fully clean, so again I've just given it a good spray, and I'm cleaning the outside as well because it's just important to make sure that this is all fully clean before we begin the job of putting the new filter in and reassembling the housing. It's critically important when we're reassembling this filter just to make sure that everything is as clean as possible. So we've given the parts a good spray out before and they've dried out inside. We can see here we have the new filter, and the new filter does come with a new O-ring that sits into the housing. So the first job is open up this filter, get out that O-ring and make sure that we replace the old O-ring with the new one. Again, a pick here is a perfect tool just to grab that top O-ring that sits in the housing like that, remove it and install the new O-ring. This will ensure that we don't have any leaks once we reassemble it. Now the filter can be just slid into the lower half of the filter assembly. It's now time to reassemble the top and the bottom sections. Remember the points that we noted before that had to be lined up? We need to make sure that these are still going to be lined up. The top section also has two little lugs that will line up into two cutouts on the lower section. It's difficult to get this wrong, but don't force it in the wrong position. Once you've got it lined up, you can use the collar, and we're twisting it now the opposite direction of the arrow to tighten it back up. It will take a little bit of force to tighten this right up together, but eventually it will tighten right up and your lines will line up all together. If you look at mine here, the camera angle makes it look like they're not lined up, but they were in fact correctly lined up together. With the filter housing now reassembled, it's time to reinstall it back into the car. The first thing to do is to reconnect the electrical connection at the bottom of the filter. Sometimes this can be done quite easily before the filter is slid back into place. The side of the filter assembly has a guide that slides down into a metal support. Make sure this is correctly lined up and then just slide the filter straight down and it will sit back and lock back into place. Once the filter is fully in place, it's time to reconnect the piping. Make sure that these are connected in the way that they were removed. You may want to refer back to your picture or your diagram that you took. Make sure also that the locking tabs have been engaged, and when done, give it a good wipe over just to make sure you've cleaned up any spilt diesel and just to take some pride in your work. Now before you can start the car, you have to prime this pump. This is going to involve at least 3 ignition cycles of at least 30 seconds each. That means turning the ignition on, holding it till the ignition's on for at least 30 seconds, turning the key off and repeating. I would suggest you do this at least 3 or 4 times before attempting to start the car. Whilst you're cycling the ignition at least these 3 times, it's a good time to check for leaks and make sure that everything has been clipped up correctly and that there's no diesel leaking at all. With that done, you're now ready to start the car and enjoy the fact that you have clean fuel going to your engine. Job done. Hey, thanks for watching. If you like what you see, make sure you give it a thumbs up and think about subscribing. Make sure you put a comment below and I'll be sure to answer it.